What's good, you guys? It is Will here from Shadow Ascent signing back in, and in this video I want to talk about confidence, self-esteem, how to build on that, how to work on that, and the fact that to begin any new activity or new course of action, you're not going to have that at your disposal, and it takes genuine experience to build that fortitude. So let's go. To begin, I'll give a little bit more personal experience, and throughout a lot of my life, confidence was something that kind of plagued me. I always felt in certain ways and regards that I was a little bit incapable, and that made itself known in academics through school, because early on, when we started really being tested, and I would say that might have been around like middle school, grades 6 to 8, I struggled to maintain a high level of grades and performance. And so when I would see my report card and there would be occasional C's, D's, and hey, there were once in a while an F, I would feel very self-conscious about it. I would feel just ashamed, essentially, because even though there are many people and students who struggle in school, I would see my friends excelling or doing well, and I would sit back and think, hey, like, is there something wrong with me? Am I very lazy? What's going on, right? And especially when you're at that age when, I was 12 to 14 years old, you can kind of jump to conclusions. You're not as aware or able to make rash epiphanies or come to those sort of conclusions. And so school was a big way that made itself present. And because of that, I felt a little bit that shame, a little bit of that shame and embarrassment, so to speak, when I would just be socializing with people, having to talk about school and classes and grades and things of that nature. One area of life that I was always confident in was sports. I grew up playing baseball. I was involved for a couple years in football and basketball, but mainly baseball. And I didn't really question myself that much. That was essentially how I made my identity, what I revolved my identity around at those early ages, because it was something I was good at, something I was passionate about. And I was like, hey, this is something that I can feel confident about. And so that's what I did. I made it my identity. I talked to people about baseball all the time and my own experience, how my games would go, my practices would go. I'd want to talk about what was going on in baseball and professionally. But as high school came to an end, so did my baseball career, so did my playing days. And now it wasn't a part of my identity anymore. I had to figure out some kind of way to find who I was, as everybody does in that time of their life when college is around the horizon. And obviously it's different depending on where you live. I live in the United States, so that's the education system, at least the hierarchy. You go from middle or elementary school to middle school, high school, and then college. And early on, I didn't really know exactly who I was or what I wanted to do, as nobody really does. I didn't struggle per se, at least mentally. I was kind of just an average kid going around, but I also felt intimidated by taking on new challenges and risks and going out. And for one thing, driving. That was a big thing that I always struggled with. I would see friends going out and getting their licenses, or even just driving to school or driving to new places, and I would feel very intimidated by it. I always thought that I was incapable of doing it. I would sit back and think, like, the idea of actually putting myself out there and driving and getting on the road, it just wasn't something that I was capable of doing. I almost put people on another pedestal, on a higher pedestal, and that is something that I feel like a lot of us can do in life, is put people on a higher regard than us, right? And that's the thing we realize, is that we are all humans. Everyone has a lot of weaknesses and insecurities. That's just the moral of the story. Everyone does. And driving was one of those things for me. I never really even wanted to talk about it because I felt, again, embarrassed and a little bit ashamed. But eventually I got my license, and in time I worked my way up to a point where driving is something that I have become very comfortable doing. And I realize how capable I am. Like, it just takes exposure and experience, and you have to willingly go into situations in life as the fool, as the amateur, as the weak one. And that goes for any sort of facet in life. If you want to learn how to drive, if you want to learn how to improve your writing abilities, if you want to learn how to go to the gym and lift weights, if you want to learn how to speak to people with a sense of charisma, you're going to have to go into that experience being absolutely horrible. You're going to have to confront your fear. Because let's face it, when I did first start driving, I wasn't good at it because I had never done it. I had never given myself the chance to. We have such high expectations of ourselves, and a lot of the times we might not necessarily be very bad at something. It's just that we don't have experience. Another reason why I was afraid of driving for so long, and I don't necessarily think this was like the main reason, but I did have a negative experience when I was basically a kid, not quite a child, maybe like early adolescence, but I went go-karting and I was very much struggling to figure out the mechanisms and how the cart worked and trying to separate and disassociate the acceleration from the brake and the turning radius and things of that nature. So I struggled through that, and it was a difficult negative experience. And so the idea of getting on the road, I was like, oh man, I'm not good at this. But when it comes to something like that, or when it comes to wanting to go to the gym, you're gonna have to face being weak and seeing people who have put time into doing it genuinely be better than you. But that doesn't mean you're not going to improve. You just have to be willing to go into situations in life being the fool. It's akin to a lot of what athletes preach, professional athletes. I believe there was a story, I don't know where I might have heard it, but someone was talking about Kobe Bryant and his sort of strategy and the way he went about things. And in practice, as good as he was, he would practice new drills and activities and shots and moves as if he knew absolutely nothing, as if he didn't know what he was doing. And in the games, because of how much time he put in and how humble he was in that approach, he didn't feel a lack of confidence whatsoever, right? It came natural to him. And I guarantee you, watching this video, that you have something that you're not so good at, and it could be a very important facet of life, or maybe it might not be, but perhaps it's something you've been putting off for a while. When it comes to doing something, one thing at this point for me, to give you an example, is cooking, right? Like, I just have never taken initiative to buy a cookbook or learn new recipes and even the basics of it. I've always been a little bit shy and timid to do that. Now, I will say my parents were never really cooks, so they didn't introduce me to that. But nonetheless, now that I'm an adult, especially if it's something I want to learn how to do, I gotta take action and be willing to take on that challenge. And again, going into it, I will not be that great. The first meal I prepare probably won't be all that splendid, but I promise you that you have something in your life that you probably feel maybe a little bit insecure about your abilities or how you feel, and there can be this stigma in your head that you might actually be incapable of not only doing it, but improving and actually becoming a little bit better over time. I like to look at life as if there are certain barriers, right? It's kind of like if we're within, like here's a door. Imagine my hand here as a door, and we're all within here, right? Like the outside is what we want to attain, is what we want to achieve or go do, but we are stuck here. And there are times where we can kind of see that door starting to open a little bit, and we take a peek outside. We look around for a second, but then a part of us is like, no, like I can't, right? It's ego, whether it's past experience, whether it's our own idea of who we are and what we can and can't do. And so stepping out of that boundary and going beyond what we've convinced ourselves we can't do, it takes a lot of courage. It's not easy, and facing discomfort is something that we all have to do. You don't want to be too comfortable in life or too complacent. At the very least, to begin, you kind of have to admit the fact that you've been a little bit scared and intimidated by opening that door and actually going outside of that boundary. It's like you've placed a no trespassing sign in front of it. And because of this, we can almost convince ourselves that we're weak, that we're inferior beings, because we are so scared to take on the challenge. But fear is a natural aspect of life. All of us are afraid of something. And it's the reality of a certain situation that the only way through your fear is quite literally through it. You know, you can't tiptoe around in life for so long. You have to be willing to take challenges on head on. And again, as much as I used to fear driving, it took me actually getting out on the road to realize this isn't so bad. This really isn't as much of a big deal as I was making it. I would assume it's the same thing when it comes to something like cooking. And the reason why that is because the amount of time we spend dwelling in our mind about the anxieties of taking the action, of being in that situation. But then we're in that situation, hey, there might be a level of nerve and anxiety present, but it's interesting how it kind of just dissipates when we unlock that fear. It reminds me of school presentations and how the days leading up to it, at least in my experience, I would be very nervous for it. I would be timid about it. It would constantly be on my mind. And then I would get up there and speak in my presentation, and I'd be like, you know what? This isn't so bad. It felt like a freeing sensation. Like this weight was lifted off of my chest because I was actually doing it. Now, self-esteem, I would say, is definitely linked to confidence, but it's not inherently the same thing. I would say self-esteem is a lot about how you perceive your own self. It's about how you feel your own image of who you are as a person. And to go back to dwelling into the mind, it's a lot about how you perceive your own thoughts, because we all experience both positive and negative thoughts. And sometimes when we attach to them, right, when we attach to the idea of, oh, I'm weird, I'm weak, I'm just not capable of doing this, and then that can kind of become a pattern, a trend where we self-sabotage in certain situations. Right? There are particular scenarios where we might just be lacking the credentials or the ability to go ahead and thrive. And so in these situations, you know, we can feel like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm so weird. I'm so weak. That's what our mind wants to convince us of. But I do feel like we have some level of control over which thoughts and bubbles that, you know, meander through our enigmatic mind that we want to attach ourselves to. Which ones do we want to subscribe to? And affirmations are very important in all of our lives, to sit down and give yourself credit for the things that you've actually done, and say, even for what I am lacking in and the skills that I'm not thriving in at the moment, I can improve. It's not like something that is just so fixated in my life that I'm just always gonna suck when it comes to my driving skills, and I'm always gonna be physically incapable of going to the gym and taking on that challenge. And those are just examples, right? But it's always unique to every single individual. So to each their own, right? Everyone has their own struggles and, like I said, insecurities. Recognizing that and the fact that you are flawed, but also very much capable of improving and focusing your attention towards a certain area of life is an essential way of building that process and building that self-esteem. Like, hey, I can do this. I can do this, even if I'm struggling, even if it is challenging, even if it might take time and failure and struggles. Like, I can do this. If you guys have anything that you want to say or about confidence, about even just your life, feel free to let me know down in the comments. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts and experience on this topic, because we've all had our own experience and ways in which we are confident and ways in which we are not. And I gave some examples for me, so I would love to hear some for you. And I thank you guys, as always, for tuning in. Much love, good vibes, and Will from Shadow Ascent, signing out.